Welcome to Intangibles, a podcast about traits, behaviors, and qualities that entrepreneurs can cultivate to help be successful. I'm your host, Steve BERG. I'm a partner at a New York City-based venture capital fund called Lytical Ventures. Lytical Ventures focuses on early-stage investments of companies that drive corporate intelligence. Corporate intelligence includes, for example, cybersecurity, data and analytics, and artificial intelligence. You can find us at www.lyticalventures.com. Lytical is spelled Lytical, Ventures, all one word, .com. This season is brought to you by Denton's Venture Technology Group at dentonsventurebeyond.com. Operating as a boutique within the world's largest law firm, the Venture Technology Group runs with hard-charging tech entrepreneurs to drive growth through strategic business, finance, and legal advice from Silicon Valley and New York to London, Berlin, Hong Kong, and beyond. Learn more at dentonsventurebeyond.com. We have a new production partner this season, VC Careers. If you're looking for a job in venture capital, join over 8,000 VCs and VC job hunters on John Gannon's VC Jobs email list. Visit johngannonblog.com/intangibles to learn more and to subscribe. Also, please find Intangibles on its new home on the web, www.intangiblespodcast.com. I've always wanted to work a quote from The Wizard of Oz into the podcast, and today's the day. In fact, the Cowardly Lion sings the following: "I'm afraid there's no denying. I'm just a dandelion, a fate I don't deserve. I'm sure I could show my prowess, be a lion, not a mouse, if I only had the nerve." The topic of today's podcast is courage. While the Cowardly Lion put it quite lyrically, Steve Jobs is more succinct when he says, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition." Helping us today gain the courage to follow our heart and intuition is Kate Swoboda, also known as Kate Courageous. Kate wears many hats, including life coach, consultant to organizations, contributing columnist to magazines such as USAToday, Forbes, and Business Insider, and is the author of a brand new book called The Courage Habit. Plus, I believe Kate has the word courage tattooed on her right shoulder, in Sanskrit no less. So she's really putting her money where her mouth is. Hi, Kate. Welcome to Intangibles.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you on. If you don't mind, I'm going to dive right in. As a way to set the table, can you give a synopsis of the introduction of your book? And specifically what I'm talking about is your story of overachieving, then the realization you came to, and what you did on the Christmas holiday that immediately followed that realization. I think a lot of people probably are in that particular place when they start their journey, just like you did.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a really familiar story. So, typical type A overachiever, always got the good grades, always did the extracurriculars, the doing what you're supposed to kind of life, but, getting a little thrill from the to-dos and the achievement and, the cult of busy and all that. And I'm sitting in a meeting last hour of the last day before Christmas break, and I'm, wearing my suit, and this is an extra meeting, and I'm listening to everybody talk about all the things that they feel we should be doing over Christmas break to prepare for what comes after Christmas break. And all of a sudden, this thought that I always describe as coming out of nowhere and sort of just climbing up inside of my life comes up. And that thought is, I don't want to do this anymore. And I also say that I was very surprised by this thought. I was, I'd done everything. I'd made every choice to get myself to exactly that place where I, was in the career of my choice and had the option to advance up the ranks. And so it was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Me, really? What? But it was right there, and it wouldn't go away. I don't want to do this anymore. And so I went, left that meeting, went on Christmas break, and kind of went, well, if I don't want to do this anymore, what do I want to do? And I talk in the Courage Habit about how for a while I was really stuck in this space of just kind of, desperate journaling and trying to go, what's really going on here? And sometimes even at first batting the thought away, like, oh, this isn't real. I must just be overwhelmed. I must just be burnt out. But it was very real. And it was a thought that in hindsight, which is always, 2020, I had been having signs that my path at that point wasn't really working. And as I began to work with this more and more and more and go, okay, I know this to be true like I know nothing else. I don't want this path anymore. What's this about? What came to me was that part of the reason it had taken so long for me to get here was that I'd been afraid. I mean, it opened up this whole who are you identity crisis, and it really threw my ability to trust myself, because I thought I had been trusting myself with every decision I'd made to get myself into that job and into that life. And then how could I trust myself to make different decisions? And that was opening up just a ton of fear. And it was great. It was great and it was awful all at the same time. That's the other thing I tell people about this, because we live in this culture that really romanticizes how we handle fear and courage and making big life decisions or pivoting. And it turns out that, that romanticization that we see in the movies, it's not really how it looks. When you decide, oh, hey, my life isn't working and I need to do something completely different.
Well, yeah, and that intellectual honesty is, it's hard to come by, especially when, your sense is that it's crisis. I know I said I want to dig in, but based on your story, I think I'd actually like to take a step back and talk about what you were mentioning about conformity and what modern society says about being a nonconformist and also about taking risks. So, I mean, in your opinion, what do you think our parents and our teachers and our peers typically say about how we should be as grown-ups?
Well, I think that everybody's coming from a place, authority figures usually are coming from a place of wanting us to be safe. And I mean, I just go, my parents are coming out of the 70s and 80s, and I look at the state of the world and the economy at that time, and from what I understand of that period in history and unemployment, if you could find a job where you were set for the next 30 or 40 years of your life and just climb the career ladder, you were good. And it was an incredibly vulnerable thing to think of not having that kind of job stability. So if I had been my parents at that time, I'm sure I would have told me what they told me, which is, you got to get out there and you got to work hard and you got to sacrifice and you got to find something really stable. You got to make sure that it all makes sense on paper. I don't resent that as life advice. But then, of course, the sacrifice that gets made when we talk about conformity is that, conformity is not the birthplace of innovation. Conformity is not often where people are their most courageous or most authentic selves. And in the Courage Habit, I talk about how I think real courage is about how living in such a way that who you truly are on the inside becomes how you actually live on the outside. And conformity is not the name of the game if that is going to be the way that you approach life.
I think that particular stream of consciousness is really significant at the moment, because I think we are for sure exiting, if not long exited, a period where you do play it safe, you get a job and you stay in that job. I mean, I think if anything, one doesn't stay in a job, and one even wonders, if that job is going to be there in a couple of years' time. So I mean, I do think that, that extrapolation of that advice forward, it seemed right? It seemed right, but we're coming to the place where that conventional wisdom is, no longer relevant. I was just wondering, I mean, I know I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole already here, but do you think that this type of guidance about risk avoidance is most often the case or more often the case for women than it is for men in society? Or is it, pretty equally, doesn't really matter? We're kind of trained to take the risk out of our daily lives and daily routines.
Well, I absolutely think that women get more about this than men, although typically the way that women are conditioned will be a little bit different. It's not, for sure, there are women who receive conditioning around don't take too much risk, or it's unwomanly for you to be so visible, so ambitious. But in particular, what I noticed with women is that we are conditioned around needing to be enough, yet not being too much. It's like you need to be enough of an employee, but you need to not be too much. Like, so speak up, don't be a wallflower. But then somehow as a woman, you're supposed to know how to make sure you don't cross that invisible line that, and the line, of course, moves depending on who you're talking to. You don't cross that invisible line and then become brash and, a ball buster, or whatever these, phrases are going to be. And so I think that I've read some research that actually shows that, starting at a young age in our schooling systems, women are disciplined more often when they talk in louder voices, so if you're talking at the preschool level, if a boy says, "Oh, wow," and a girl says, "Oh, wow," more often the girl will be told, "Let's use our inside voices," and the boy won't be. And so it's this very real thing. And frankly, I have even seen it. I have a daughter who is almost 4, and I've seen it at her preschool where I'm dropping her off. And in the 5 minutes that I'm dropping her off, this boy that she's told me is always picking on her has picked on 5 other kids. And I'm watching it. I'm seeing it. I pointed out to the teacher, who, of course, doesn't see any of it. And they think I'm nuts when I tell them, "Hey, my daughter keeps saying this kid's picking on her." And I think that is just pure conditioning, that it's boys will be boys. And I think it starts at the preschool age. By the time we're adults, a lot of women learn that there are costs for being visible, for speaking out, for taking risks, that the penalties of failure are much higher. If you failed, it's because you were an emotional woman who ran after the thrill of the risk instead of being pragmatic. Whereas for a man, it can be, well, he took a risk and at least he tried. And those can be very different punitive costs in our society.
Well, let's hope that old school thinking is the equivalent of the old school thinking we just talked about in terms of, extrapolating advice forward into time. Like you were talking about what your parents, unwittingly did, thinking it was the best thing. I'd like to spend a moment talking about fear and risk. I mean, obviously that's come up maybe half a dozen times already. When it comes to people's work lives or sex lives or relationships, what are we most often afraid of?
Well, I think at a core level, people are afraid of not being enough, and that we're social animals. And so we're afraid that if we're not enough, we'll be rejected, we won't be accepted. And that's that conformity thing again on some level, because cultural standards of what enoughness is are always determined by the culture. And so I think that we really fear social isolation and rejection. We want love. We're afraid that if we're not enough, we won't get love. That's right. It sounds very woo, but I think that's what's at the core of it all.
And then coming back to the risk piece, my thinking about, that's such a strong driver that it seems like one would be highly willing to take risk, but that in fact is not the case. And so I'm positing, for your opinion, is this simply the discomfort associated with the possibility of an unsavory outcome, a failure when we do take a risk? Is that the thing that actually stops us from taking the risk itself?
Well, I might need you to unpack that for me a bit.
Yeah. So, okay. So, yeah, I mean, on one hand, we're conditioned not to, right? We're to not have courage, to keep staying with the path. Like at that moment, you mentioned you were even trying to say, look, I'm going to muscle through this. This can't exactly be right. But you intrinsically you knew. And so what I'm saying is, was it the fear associated with, if I do something different, it might turn out bad? Was that fear in and of itself the thing that stopped you from taking the risk? Or was it is that part of it? Or was it just the kind of broad-based conditioning from society that, this is how we do it and it makes us happy?
I think it was a mix of all of the above. I mean, there was the immediate kind of, fear of well, first of all, there was a very real fear of, well, if I'm not going to do this, then what am I going to do? I mean, like I didn't know what I was going to pivot to. I didn't know that even the life that I live today, with the lifestyle that I have today and the work I do, was even possible. It's a job description I'd never read before. So there's that piece. And then there's the resource fears, which are very pragmatic, just like money. I know that I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. But I still have rent that I need to pay living in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then, sure, there was a fear of kind of that societal fear, in the sense that people might not understand, like that, why would you work so hard, or, get all these advanced degrees, or put all this time and effort into something only to change your mind. And then I think there are identity fears in there too. Who am I anyway? Which is the trust thing. How do I trust myself? Who am I making these decisions, and how do I trust myself, given that it clearly, I'm sitting here in a meeting going, this is not the life that I want.
So there had to be a tipping point, right? I mean, you had to get to the point where you just hated your situation so much that was greater than the sum of all the fears that you identified. Yes.
And I mean, we can be motivated by vision and being excited about the vision that is to come, or we can be motivated often by, this really sucks and I don't want to do it anymore. And right. I was definitely in the sucks category. And I had physical symptoms. I had headaches all the time. I was tired all the time. I wouldn't say that I was clinically depressed, but it was very meh. Like nothing was very exciting or enlivening or joy-filled. So in hindsight, there were all these things that pointed to the fact that I wasn't very happy. And it was really just like I said, it wasn't even like a pressure rising kind of I'm fed up. It was just sitting there in this meeting, watching two colleagues debate with one another about some office politics type of stuff. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
That's all.
The banality just finally got you. One of the things that you point out is that fear manifests itself in a couple different behaviors: perfectionist, saboteur, martyr, pessimist. Do you want to touch on these for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the courage habit, I talk about literally how habits are formed in the brain. And my hypothesis in the book is that fear-based habits, fear-based behaviors have become habits. And there are 4 really common fear-based behaviors that I see have become patterns for people or routines for people. And they're perfectionism, people-pleasing or martyrdom, pessimism, self-sabotage, or the martyr, the saboteur, the perfectionist, etc. And the way habits work is that there's this cue that you feel in your body, which we could call the fear you feel when you realize, like, I don't want to do this salary job anymore. I want to go after something entrepreneurial. And then there are the routines that we go into, which are the responses to the cue. And routines are always designed to get us to a reward, and the reward is whatever lessens stress. So if I feel that stress about, I don't want to do this anymore, and then I go into a routine such as perfectionism, which is a fear-based routine, then I do get to the reward. And people will go, well, what do you mean you get to the reward? Perfectionism usually doesn't feel all that great. And it's like, well, yeah, it doesn't feel great long term, but in the moment, most people who go into a perfectionistic routine feel just more in control. Or, if you have a different routine, I'll give the example of pessimism. So you feel like, I don't want to do this anymore. You go into pessimism, which is more like that wet blanket. Well, what's the point? It's not going to work out anyway. I don't have the time. I don't know anything about business, all those things. And the reward that gets you to, again, short term, is maybe you back off on your business idea, and so then you don't feel all that stress. So there's a cue, a routine, and a reward, and you can either find yourself in those fear-based routines and go, all right, this is all I got, and your progress will probably move at a snail's pace, or you can go, oh, I feel afraid. There's an opportunity here. What are the behaviors that research indicates are the courage-boosting, resilience-inducing behaviors? And that's where we swap a fear-based routine for a courage-based routine. So 4 patterns: perfectionism, people-pleasing, pessimism, self-sabotage, and learning how to recognize how those have become actual behavioral habits in your life, governed in part by your neuropsychology in your brain, and then swapping those for courage-based behaviors. That is the courage habit. That's how you develop it.
Okay. This is a final question on fear, because it's where I think we're done. But the question is, okay, so we're afraid. So what? What do we do with this fear that we have?
Well, I think that, the research really pointed to 4 specific things that are the things you do that you turn to when you're afraid, because you're not going to get rid of the fear. And those specific things are accessing the body, listening without attachment, reframing limiting stories, and reaching out to create community. And I can go over each of those if you'd like. So
that is the courage habit. I thought what you would say is that you have to kind of get comfortable with it. You have to kind of live with that a little bit, as opposed to trying to push it away or disagree with it. Or I think in my mind, for sure, we're going to talk about the courage habit. I'm thinking about the step, kind of half a step before that, when the realization happens.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is that the parts of the courage habit, such as accessing the body, are how you get comfortable with it.
I see.
So instead of it being, I feel fear, so I access the body to get rid of fear, it's I feel fear and I access the body to get more comfortable with the fact that the fear exists. I'm not going to get rid of it, but I need some kind of a tool, some kind of way to be with what's coming up for me so that I can actually continue to do the things I want to do in my life.
Right. Okay. Now I understand. When I looked up fear in the thesaurus, I saw there's a couple antonyms that are worth mentioning. Courage, of course, is one. Faith and trust are others. When we are embarking on a risky undertaking, which means a change in this sense, and the outcome is uncertain, how important is faith? How important is belief that you can do this?
Well, I think that if we try to go straight to belief that we can do it, and we genuinely have some aspect of our fear that we're not attending to, it's going to feel like putting a positive affirmation on everything. And if positive affirmations work for someone and really make them feel fulfilled and happier and all of those things, great. But a lot of people that I talk to tell me that positive affirmations feel like trying to argue with yourself. Your fear is going, you can't do it. Your affirmation is, I know that I can do it. And then it just goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth.
Right.
So really, I think before we're going to be able to do anything like shift a belief about what you think you're capable of, we're going to have to attend to the very vulnerable but very real fear that we feel. And I mean, I just think of the story I started off with of being in that space of going, I know that I don't want to do this job anymore. I want to pivot to something else. Before someone can really start making the to-do list and taking action, I think it's important for them to actually attend to the part of themselves that feels like they're a loser or they can't do it or they don't have the skills. It's like, how do we really be with that aspect of ourselves? Because that's where the real discomfort is.
Yeah. So I think what you're telling me is I'm getting ahead of myself in terms of, taking that step into the unknown. There's some things that I need to do, accomplish, kind of mentally, internally before I do take that step into the unknown. Okay. I got it. So the audience for Intangibles, the podcast, they're typically entrepreneurs. So this is a question specifically for them. Based on your thoughts about conformity, risk-taking, fear, why do you suspect that entrepreneurs and startup founders are so much more comfortable with uncertainty of the risks that they're willing to accept compared to the average person? Is there something that's different? Is there something genetic? Is there some, conditioning that happens when they're younger? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I hear a lot of them say that they're not actually as comfortable as they appear. And what we're really talking about is not so much comfort as it is a willingness to be with risk. And the wisest thing I've heard anyone say, I wish I could do attribution right now, but I can't think of who I personally first heard say this, is that people who are entrepreneurial fear how they feel about themselves if they don't take the risk more than they fear the possibility of going after something that they want and failing. And I would absolutely say that that's true in my case and in the case of many entrepreneurs that I'm connected to. It would bother me far, far more to know that I wanted to put a book proposal out there or to know that I wanted to pitch my work to a particular person and not do it than it would to do it and get a no. So That is something that I think is an important attunement for anybody who is looking at becoming an entrepreneur. It's like really going, okay, look, a no is not going to kill you. It's just not. It's not going to kill you. But what will kill you is staying in the job that you don't like and looking back when you're ready to retire and going, wow, I wish I'd changed course 30 years ago. I think that'll kill you. It's a slow death, but that to me is like not living.
Right. Darn it. I blew it. I had my shot and I didn't take it. Yeah. So, all right, we've talked a little bit about how we've gotten here. I think we should try and put a couple of tools in people's toolboxes. And frankly, you may have touched on this, and maybe there's just a framing of it that could be more helpful, or maybe you didn't touch on it. I think what we need to do is define what the courage to drive our work and our interactions with people looks like. And I know you call this honoring the value of courage. Could you explain that a little bit to me?
Yeah, I think that, a reference point that I sometimes use, because it's one that people can be more familiar with, is like Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he talks about what your center is and how to make principles your center instead of work or instead of your marriage or instead of all the things that we think are going to be external to us. So a principle-driven life is one where you've decided, like, these are sort of the maxims or the ways of being that I inhabit. And I think that it's really about looking at how you yourself decide to orient towards the things that you fear. So it's exactly really just what we were talking about a moment ago on some level.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Deciding things like going, deciding things like going, it is more important to me to try to go after the things that I want than it is for me to not go after them and then wonder what could have happened. That's a principle by which I live life. And the principle applies in all arenas. It's more important for me to go after what I want in relationships than to hold back, to go after what I want in business than to hold back, to go after what I want for my health than to hold back. So it's really about deciding that you're going to orient your life around something that doesn't have to do with circumstance. So you're not just going, I'll only do it if I have the money. I'll only do it if I have the green light from that gatekeeper. Instead, it's I do it and I do it to the best of my ability because this actually matters to me and is important to me. That's how I live. Yeah,
I think that's a great orientation, right? That's a great kind of, North Star mental compass point to point at, just as a beginning. So the title of the book is The Courage Habit, and I think habit is a pretty interesting word choice because from the get-go you establish habit as almost this double-edged sword, right? Because in the beginning, it's habit that stops you from being courageous, but by the end, it's habit that allows us to be courageous in an ongoing fashion, right? So, is the commentary there that habit is human nature and it's just deciding and implementing what that habit is going to be?
Well, about half of our daily behavior is governed by habit. So in that sense, it's human nature. But whether it's your habit to think in the midst of challenges, this isn't going to work out and I suck, or if it's your habit to think, I just need to work harder, and if I work hard enough and hustle enough, I'll get there. They're both habitual ways of thinking, and I think they're a little bit separate than human nature. But it's absolutely part of how the brain likes to organize itself on a neuropsychological level, to expect what is to come and to try to prepare for it, understand it immediately, and respond to it in a way that protects the overall organism. Psychologically protects, of course, as well as physically.
So I'll tell you what I like about it. What I like about it is that a habit is something that can be learned. And that means that I didn't need to be born courageous. And I mean, I think that's your whole point, is that, it's not something genetic. It's something that we can all develop, we can all learn, we can all implement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the research bears that out as well, that for sure, there are some people who just seem to have a little bit more risk tolerance in terms of how they were born, although with genetics, it gets pretty difficult to tease out, I think, risk tolerance that's due to your conditioning versus your genetics. But without a doubt, the resilience that comes from being able to say, I failed and I can get back up again. I tried and I didn't quite hit the mark, but I'm going to keep going. Or let me just have basic curiosity about where this path might lead. Getting comfortable with all of those things is absolutely something that you can decide right here, right now, today. I want this to be different at 30 days from now and a year from now, and it will be.
Yeah. That's empowering. Okay. You mentioned it before, but I think it's time that we dive in specifically to the 4 steps of building a courage habit. And step 1, you told us, is access the body. I think a little bit more detail than what we've covered. So, what we've talked about so far, is a good place to start. Can you give us a little bit more in terms of what you mean by access the body?
Well, so fear is felt in the body. It's primal. It's not logical. And because we feel it in the body, we've got to deal with it in the body. Most people try to push away their fear by ignoring what they feel in the body, hurrying up and hustling to some kind of logic, or of course avoiding, the thing that makes them afraid. And so first, I'm saying you've got to really get attuned to what your particular fear sensations feel like. Could be anything. Could be a headache, could be tight shoulders, could be a churning stomach, could be chronic forgetfulness. Some people have fear show up in really interesting ways. But you got to know what that is so that you can then discharge or process through some of that emotion. And of course, there's a treasure trove of research about how getting mindful and practicing presence will help you to deal with discomfort and fear sensations in the body. But I actually have found that there are other things you can do too. There are some people who actually, when they are feeling really afraid, they need to cry, or they need to scream into a towel, or they need to laugh. Like there's laughter yoga that can be very effective for people where you just literally try to laugh. Any form of exercise, taking a run would do that. I'm a triathlete, and I tell people all the time, I don't know how I do anything in my life without cardio. I just don't, because that's something that helps me to process out anxiety, overwhelm, stress, fear. There have been times where I'm super pissed off at, something or someone in my life, and I'm like, all right, and I go out for a run, and by the time I'm done with the run, I'm just not really angry at them anymore. And I think that discharging excess emotion, especially emotion we have about fear, is a really powerful and proactive step to take.
So I have two reactions. The first reaction is that more and more and more, I mean, it used to say it's a third, but it's got to be well over a third of the people that come on the podcast in one way or another talk about mindfulness and presence. So, I mean, I think that there's a growing consensus, and it's getting louder about the value of that. The second thing that I immediately react to is, all the things you talked about are release, right? Are just a way to kind of get to the point where you can begin to think about these things. So that's something that people haven't talked about as much. So what I'm going to take away from this is I've got to think about that a little bit more. One of the reasons why this particular part, it might be the hardest part, frankly, honestly, of the 4 steps, it can be pretty hard, right? Because there's a chance that you might hear or feel a whole bunch of things that you might not really want to deal with.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is it right here. We live in a culture that wants to kick fear's ass. These are all the memes, or we want to tell fear to shut up and go away, or again, white knuckle your way through it, or avoid it. There's also pleasing it and placating it, trying to do it really, really well in your life so that the fear won't come up. We have all kinds of ways that we try to outrun fear. They don't work. The only people who are able to truly successfully outrun fear, who are walking around in our modern life, assuming, of course, you're not like just living a monastic life up on a hill with no, 20 email accounts and cell phones ringing at you all the time, are people who have psychopathology. People who are sociopaths and psychopaths are divorced from feeling fear. They can register this when they test, measures of sweat and breathing and pulse. They don't feel as much fear, but I don't think anyone wants to become someone suffering from severe psychopathology. The rest of us are handling our fear either by dealing with it or not dealing with it. And not dealing with it has a lot of costs. And I think that one of the ways that those costs can express themselves is just if we're holding stress in all the time. If there's this metaphorical emotional balloon, if you have a balloon that gets too full of air, it does one of two things. It either leaks air or it explodes. And I think we live in a society where a lot of people have very full emotional balloons that either leak air in the form of being a real jerk to that tech support person or posting the flyby nasty Facebook comment, or being passive aggressive to the cashier or snippy with our loved ones. Or we explode, and we either explode by like just totally losing it or getting angry or sitting in, frankly, a meeting that's been scheduled for the last hour of the last day before you go on Christmas break. You're like, I can't do it anymore. We are a culture that really needs to access the body in order to become more courageous in our lives.
Points for bringing it full circle. So step 2, listen without attachment. Why without attachment?
Because you can't let fear be in the driver's seat. If you listen to your fear that says you suck, why bother? Then and if you attach to it, listening is fine. If you attach to it, then fear makes the next move. You make your next move based on believing that the fear is you and it's not you. So we've got to learn how to listen, but without getting attached. And the example I'll sometimes give is if I walked up to you on the street, and I mean, you're in the New York area, right? This might have happened to you. If I walk up to you in the middle of the street and I say, your hair's rainbow, you will hear my words, but my guess is that you're not going to go, oh no, better make an appointment with my stylist. My hair's rainbow. Got to do something about it, right? Like, you're not going to believe me. So that is the kind of unhooking from fear that needs to happen. We need to hear what it's saying so that we can be very aware of what it's afraid of and do something with what it's afraid of. But we need to not believe it, attach to it, or make our next move based on it. Okay.
I understood that. There's a follow-on. And the follow-on is, okay, when I'm doing this, right? When I'm detaching that, what's my end goal? What am I trying? When I've done that, how am I propelling myself forward in this process?
Well, you're not letting fear be the one that's in the driver's seat. You're not believing that it's you.
Okay.
A lot of people think their fear actually is them.
I see. But okay. All right. It feels like what you're telling me is that the removal of this negative, essentially gives me permission to be positive and aggressive in terms of going after something. Do I have it right?
I would say it's a little different than that. I would say it's not even removing a negative. Like, the fear is not negative. It's a wound, and all a wound ever wants to do is to heal. Our fears do not tell us, you suck and you're a loser for no reason. There's a wounding that's there. And if your fear can yell at you loud enough and tell you that you suck and you're a loser, then maybe you won't go after this thing that could expose you to criticism where more people in life might tell you that you suck or you're a loser. That's all it's trying to do, is prevent further wounding. We need to listen to our fear so that we're not ignoring it. We just need to not give it the power to make the decisions for us.
Okay, so I'm revising my understanding to be that I need to become comfortable and okay with the voice inside my head is saying, rather than being defensive about it. Yeah.
And the thing I say too is that if being defensive about it or telling that voice to go away worked, nobody would be afraid of anything. It would never control us.
Okay. So we're on to step 3, and that is reframing limiting stories. This sounds a little like testing assumptions. Is that right?
I'd say it's more of taking what the fear has told you about, in this part of the process. It's about listening without attachment, taking what it tells you and then moving in to whatever degree you can in the direction of what you truly want. This is part of more the destabilization of fear as an authority. It could be testing an assumption, but instead of the testing, it's more like, okay, so if your fear is telling you you're a loser, why bother? reframing limiting stories is a cognitive reframe that's going, I hear that you're afraid that I'm a loser. I think I'm going to feel like a loser if I don't try. I think that why bother needs to be reframed into, I at least want to give it a shot.
Right.
So it's not going straight into, like, you're a loser, why bother, to I'm the best in the world. It's just moving 1 inch in the direction of what you really do want for yourself and for your life.
So when you were talking about the perfectionist, the saboteur, the martyr, the pessimist, those felt like artificial barriers that we're kind of putting up to why we can't. And perhaps reframing limiting stories is actually removing those artificial barriers.
It could be, yeah. I mean, there's a removal that happens when we reframe, in the sense that the more we work with our fear as a wound and go, like, look, like, I'm not going to tell you have to shut up and go away, but I'm also not going to believe you when you tell me I can't do this. Here's another narrative. So it's a restructuring of the narrative. And in that restructuring, a barrier gets released. But I would argue the fear actually, as a wound, gets a little more healing. It gets to see like a path towards something different. And there's a real, the closest relationship I'd say would be like a parent-child relationship would be applicable here. So it's not that you are, if a child throws a fit in the supermarket, for you to actually say to that child, if the child says it's not fair, for you to actually say to the child, you're totally right. It's not fair. It's not okay to throw this fit right now, though, either. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what your choices are. That's more the dynamic that I'm encouraging with reframing a limiting story. So it's not, here's the lollipop, don't throw a fit. It's not, you better shut up and stop throwing that fit. It's, I get that you feel how you feel. I understand that. I see it. I witness it. Let's talk about what the options are. But it actually isn't okay to just keep throwing a fit in the middle of the store.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, so I think you're talking about a pretty strong technique for reframing these things. Are there any other techniques that immediately come to mind? If not, we can certainly move on. But I wondered if there's other techniques as well.
Well, there's one that is actually a bonus that comes with the courage habit. Anybody actually can access it. And it is an audio that my publisher had me record with a technique called Redo Please. And it's a dialoguing technique with the voice of fear to really get to that place where when the fear is loud, when it's not speaking very respectfully, there's a way that you can learn to dialogue with it, to go, okay, I want to hear what you have to say, but it's got to be phrased respectfully. And that is one technique that I would recommend. And then somebody could also look into narrative therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and really looking at cognitive defusion or cognitive reframing.
There you go. That's going to go in the show notes. So what can happen if we're successful at reframing these limits? Good things, right?
Yeah, I think so. It's, I'll just give the example that where I've used it the most in my recent life is going on book tour for the Courage Habit. And it's what if nobody shows for each of these events? And what if nobody shows? And then I'm standing there, getting these pitying looks from the Barnes and Noble staff of the lame writer who couldn't get anyone to show. And that's like what my fear will tell me. And the reframe becomes, you know what? If nobody shows, it still matters to me that I decided to go on book tour. Like, that actually matters to me, that I would choose not to just hide out at home once the book is out, but to actually try to go meet people and do the work in real time. So that becomes the thing that when I'm intimidated about no-shows happens. And thus far, I've had somebody show up to every single event, knock on wood. And that's the reframe that keeps me from just getting totally lost in the weeds about, outcome.
So that's what I'm going to say. All right, podcast listeners, look up Kate's book tour and make sure that somebody shows up. So there we go. I'm just nipping that in the bud right now.
You're moving straight to reaching out and creating community.
Oh, perfect. Right? What a fantastic segue. Step 4, final step in process, create community. Who's part of this community?
I mean, okay. So first of all, we got to be aware of our fear-based routines, even when we're trying to create community, right? Because perfectionists are going to try to create perfect communities. Saboteurs are going to go to the exact most negative wet blanket type people to tell about their big dream, right? Which is, if someone's historically not been supportive, they are not the first person that you should go tell, hey, I'm going to do a startup, So we have to be aware of our fear patterns even when we reach out to create community. And we also want to find people who are honoring the values of courage. So those are things like looking for people who want to practice confrontation with kindness rather than tough love. Tough love probably will ignite your internalized critic and make you get stuck in all that internalized dialogue of fear again, whereas confronting with kindness is that friend who will go, hey, this might be a hard truth, but let's talk about it. And I'm only telling you this because I really want to help you succeed. So, reaching out and creating community can happen in real time. It can happen in the private, Facebook group that we've set up for the Courage Habit. It can happen, I think podcast communities are communities. I feel very connected to, when I listen to a great podcast interview with somebody who just really resonates for me, they become, on some level, emotionally part of the community that I carry in my heart. They're the people I remember when I'm in the midst of my own difficulties. So reaching out and creating community can happen in real time, virtually anywhere. But it's really important to have community because fear thrives in isolation and it diminishes in community.
So, but yes, but I think what you're saying is that this is way more than just strength in numbers, right? Because you're talking about the traits that you want your community to have, right? So you're creating almost like this lattice work, a platform that you can stand on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the traits are really important. People who are practicing empathy rather than just rushing to give you advice. The people who are into they're like, I'm not going to uphold an image. I'm going to actually get vulnerable and be real with you about my own failures. And I talk in the book, actually, I share an anecdote in one of the chapters about the first time that I had a big failure or perceived failure.
Yes.
And I ran a course and I had 60 people enrolled and some of them weren't participating very much, and one of them asked for a refund, and I was just so embarrassed. And, spoiler alert, my predominant fear pattern, we all do all of them with the perfectionism, people-pleasing, self-sabotage, and pessimism. We all do all of them at least a little bit, but there's usually one that's a big hook. Perfectionism is my big hook.
So you worked harder, right?
Oh, yeah. I worked harder, but also I felt like I failed because somebody asked for a refund. So I'm embarrassed as hell, and I'm not telling anyone about it. My friend who happens to be visiting San Francisco comes into town. She's run courses before. How's it going, Kate? And I managed to tell her. And she's looking at me like, wait, hold on. You had 60 people enrolled for something and you had one person asking for a refund and you think you failed? Hold on a minute. And that was such a great learning experience for me because, we're not supposed to be perfect at this courage stuff. We're in process. You're not going to read the Courage Habit and then be like, great, I'm set. This is process-driven work. It's ongoing. And as you try new things, your circle of what you are comfortable with will expand, but you'll also encounter new challenges. And you're going to have blind spots. And when you have blind spots, when I have blind spots, you need your community. So if you're an entrepreneur, you need your board of advisors. You need your people that you can always count on to give you a very real opinion. And however you create community, it's a vital part.
I completely agree. Okay. So once I've made a habit out of the 4 steps we just talked about, what do I do then? What you kind of alluded, but what should I expect to happen in my life when I begin practicing?
Well, you're going to be, as I talked about, towards the beginning, who you truly are on the inside is going to be more of how you actually live on the outside. You're going to, happier. Oh, so much happier. Like tough stuff just doesn't have the same power to waylay you or to make you feel like you can't do it. It's like, okay, this sucks and I'm okay. There's like a bedrock of that. So less anxiety. I definitely say too that there's a lot more sense of connection to the fabric of your life, connection to the people you love, connection to the parts of yourself that you want to bring to the world. There's more purpose-driven living. There's more connection to all the little, not little people as in they are insignificant, but little people as in the people you don't know well, but you just have touch short-term encounters with them, and it matters that they showed up. There's a lot more gratitude. And I think that, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship, that the people who end up, we talk about the cream rising to the top and entrepreneurship being a long-term game. I think the people who don't flame out, the people who really develop a reputation for delivering quality over time, they're the people who are practicing these sorts of values.
Well, I'm going to add in one more from my own experience, and this is weird, and frankly, I can't even explain why. But my experience is that when you do take a risk, when you step into the unknown or step off the ledge or whatever, expression you want to use, somehow the world seems to know it, and the world opens up to you in very unexpected ways. Relationships, things happen, things move forward. It's not like there's, you're immune to failure, but all of a sudden it's as if people look at you differently. So I have no idea why that is. Maybe it's because they can see in your eyes that your back's to the wall and you don't have any other choice but to be successful and go forward. I don't know what it is, but for some reason, when you take that chance, it seems like, a lot of things, interesting things, mostly good things start to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's an energy that I think people walk with. There's a kind of fundamental security that happens, and it becomes less about proving yourself and more about showing up with a way of being that's really real and true to who you are. That's really magnetic. I think those are the people that I want to be around, people who are really just going, I'm going to take it. Today's a great day to take a chance on being great.
Yep. You almost like you resonate it. Okay, Kate, we're near the end here. The last 3 questions are, is there anything about the courage habit that I didn't bring into the conversation, but you think it's pretty important that we talk about?
I think the only thing I'd highlight is that the vulnerability. Again, and we kind of touched on it, but just saying, like, it is not going to be easy at first to reroute your habits. It is going to be hard. It is hard to change a habit. But with time, wouldn't it be nice if it became your default to go, oh, instead of spending a week snapping at my wife and kids or, just being a real pill to be around, how about I take 10 minutes to cry or to really get real about where the fear is telling me that I'm a piece of crap, and stop avoiding and getting into the vulnerability of really dealing with some of this stuff. It is hard at first, but you will make your way through. I think that's the only other thing I think I would add. Seems important.
Okay, besides your book on the topic, what other materials, resources would you point people to?
Well, I love anything Pema Chodron. Chodron is Chodron. And I think that the work of the Challenge Day organization is impeccable for helping people. They predominantly do work at trying to stop bullying in schools by helping students develop emotional resilience, but they offer a number of workshops. And those two are really my touchstones. And I'd say too, having a coach has been, here I am, a life coach. So, granted I'm biased, but I think having a coach is really, really helpful for staying focused and keeping your eye really pointed on what matters most. And those are all things that I incorporate into my own life. And of course, cardio, as I mentioned, which I'm only saying tongue in cheek. I'm chuckling, but really and truly, like some kind of physical activity just to really keep you centered.
Get the blood pumping. And I'm going to give you a tip in. How about www.yourcourageouslife.com?
Oh, of course. Absolutely. I mean, I try to make your inbox more courageous every single week.
So last question, besides that URL, where can people find you or follow you?
I am on Facebook at facebook.com/yourcourageouslife. And I'm on Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter as Kate Courageous. And of course, you can learn about the book by going to couragehabit.com. And I'm also the director of the Courageous Living Coach certification, which is at teamclcc.com.
Fantastic. Kate, that's it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
This has been Intangibles. I'd like to thank Denton's Venture Technology Group at dentonsventurebeyond.com for being the sponsor this season and a supportive partner. Operating as a boutique within the world's largest law firm, the Venture Technology Group runs with hard-charging tech entrepreneurs to drive growth through strategic business, finance, and legal advice from Silicon Valley and New York to London, Berlin, Hong Kong, and beyond. Learn more at dentonsventurebeyond.com. I'd like to thank VC Careers for their support, and I'd also like to thank Ben Glawe, who's a fantastic sound engineer. It is a privilege to work with him. Find him on Twitter. His handle is @visible_sound. And thank you. Keep an eye out for the next episode. I'm your host, Steve BERG.